Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire.
We had the spectacle this week, which prompted a very viral hashtag called Where's Mitch, of a freshman member of Congress who the right is obsessed with, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, chasing Mitch around, Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, around, looking for him. Jeff Merkley, the senator from Oregon who we had on earlier, joined in it. Other Democrats jumped in, all trying to make the point that the person who really now at this point is holding the government closed is Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, who at any moment could put a bill on the floor, one of the 8 passed in the House and reopened the government, but who is now saying he's only willing to put on the floor the bill Donald Trump wants, the bill he talked about yesterday, or the ideas he talked about yesterday. How is it that Democrats get the onus then, in that case, of being the ones who need to reopen the government by compromising?
Well, first of all, I think it's important. By the way, I appreciated your exchange with the congressman yesterday. I thought you were very forceful and asked the right questions about false equivalence narratives here. I think that the public is not fooled by this. I think we really should underline that in all of the polling so far, the public overwhelmingly blames Trump, not the Democrats, for the shutdown. So some kind of message is getting through. When Trump said, I'll own this, the people believed him. So that's the first thing. The second thing is Mitch McConnell is now being inconsistent with himself, because initially he said, well, I'm not going to bring anything to the floor that can't get through the House and get the president's signature. Now he is taking this Trump package, packaging it and saying, all right, I'll do the bidding for the president again. So he is just President Trump's agent on the floor of the Senate now, not much more than that. Third, I think the case for saying that there's a compromise here is that Trump is taking back 2 things he did already. He wrecked President Obama's DACA program, and he wrecked the temporary protected status program. So that looks like a compromise. The problem is, as Ron Brownstein of The Atlantic noted, this is like hostage taking squared. First, I'll take the country hostage by shutting down the government. And then, well, I'll give back temporarily part of what I took away before. If you put a big Dreamers deal, 1.8 million with, passed into law with a path for ship, then maybe we could start saying, well, there's movement here. But then he comes back this morning, and after saying, let's be nice to each other, just trashes Pelosi as a radical, it raises the point, as has already been suggested, how can you take him seriously as wanting to make any concessions at all? Yeah, and to that very point, Kurt Viola, I think that's an excellent point by EJ, is that you can't take him seriously because the two sides, both sides that are having an argument, are not the Democrats and the Republicans. Democrats are for immigration reform. They would love to do comprehensive immigration reform. They've tried to do it. Republicans don't want to do it. It's between Donald Trump and the far right of his own party. It's between, he seems to now be having a direct debate with Ann Coulter. Donald Trump this morning, maybe he's bored, maybe he's stressed. He's just been tweeting up a storm this morning. And all of these tweets kind of boil down to this one. This is a whole stream of them going after Nancy Pelosi, going after the Democrats, saying, why won't they compromise? Why won't they help me? Why won't they come to me? I'm still trying to do my State of the Union. You won't let me.
But I think this is the one that really it boils down to. And this was one of the tweets this morning. Donald Trump saying, no, amnesty is not a part of my offer. It's a 3-year extension of DACA. Amnesty will be used only on a much bigger deal, whether on immigration or something else. Likewise, there will be no big push to remove the 11 million plus people who are here illegally. But be careful, Nancy. That sounds like both a threat to do further harm by saying, if you don't give me this wall, I'm going to deport more people, but also a promise to a specific person. Ann Coulter, who's been also tweeting up a storm with every single tweet having amnesty, 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 amnesty in it. Donald Trump is it seems to me, Kurt, tell me if I'm wrong, Mitch McConnell is at the mercy of Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is at the mercy of Ann Coulter. How is that not true?
That's exactly true. And talking about context for the shutdown and how the media reports this, remember, there was a deal. It wasn't just a deal. It passed the Senate unanimously. And somehow in all of the coverage, we lose sight of the fact that Democrats, while winning the House, they really only control 1/2 of 1/3 of this government. The rest of the government is a majority controlled by conservatives. And yet in all of the stories and all the coverage, and this gets prolonged and drags out, that's somehow missed. The reality is there was a deal, and when Ann Coulter and Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity lost their minds over it, Trump pulled the plug on it at the last second. Likewise, we just saw the same thing play out over the last 24 hours. Trump announces what he calls a deal, which it isn't, but that's what he calls it. Ann Coulter loses her mind on Twitter. Here we wake up this morning, and a different Donald Trump now is tweeting something very different than what he said just a day ago. How can anybody possibly expect to negotiate with somebody who changes their mind based on the whims of really co-president Ann Coulter? and that prospect, by the way, should terrify all of us.
It is Monday, the 21st of January of 2019, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special on this special Martin Luther King Day is River City Hash Mondays. That's right, folks. Our Blue Plate special on Mondays is River City Hash. And we take all of the weekend and repurpose it for a very lovely purpose indeed. Well, it is Martin Luther King Day, and Mike Pence. Trump is just like Martin Luther King. You know, sometimes I really think these people need to go to a re-education camp. And Mike Pence and his wife need to get a little bit more. I think a conversion therapy to convert them from being sexist, racial bigots might be in order. It might, indeed. Wow. Okay, well, I had a nice weekend, lovely, great weekend with my grandson. He had to come up on Saturday and then leave on Sunday, but it was still a great visit. Or come down. Yeah, where am I? Came down from Salem area and made it down here in Southern Oregon, and then had to drive back. And he's on campus today. He's got a few things to take care of, get some studying in, and a paper to write. So, good for him. You know, he's working on this government shutdown and a holiday too. Good for him. Well, yes, had a lovely visit, but there's one thing that I have noticed, and I know that it is common in human nature to personalize another's grief so that, another person can understand it. I know that's common, though I was actually taught not to do that. At least not publicize it, verbalize it in front of someone who's recently been involved in some sort of tragedy that causes them grief. So sometimes it's really hard to just sit there and hear family and friends say, oh yeah, it's been a bad year for me. Hearing about your son dying, I lost a bunch of money in the stock market, and oh gosh, I had knee surgery, and now Israel's dead. Boy, it's been a bad year for me. And I'm like, okay, I know you're personalizing the grief. I guess you understand it. Or maybe you don't. But it would be unseemly for me to bring that up. So maybe I would suggest to folks out there who care, maybe, when someone's child dies, maybe it's not a good idea to bring up, you lost some money in the stock market, and that's the equivalent of having a bad year because your son died. kind of pissed me off a little bit. Can you tell? Man. So, it's not as if I bite my tongue. It's just that I guess maybe I know too much. I know. I see people's motivations behind things, and I'm just not in a position right now to correct them. People are the way they are, and, I'm a little tired of it, to be honest with you. It seems, and maybe I'm personalizing this, but I've seen it pointed at other people. Those who actually take the time to try to get to some sort of balance are always attacked by those who are in imbalance. Obviously, to justify their imbalance as some sort of balance. No one wants to admit that they're in dissonance, apparently. Everybody else is. So, look, I get a little tired of it. So, yeah, it kind of made me a little mad. But having my grandson this weekend, I have to say, overcomes all of that, because he's a great kid, and he's handling this well as far as I can tell. I've been trying to draw him out. But he's read a lot, too. And he knows the process of life. And it can still hurt. All right, what's on the menu today? Because there's so much. I mean, gosh, Trump is going off as usual. We're going to be a month into this government shutdown pretty soon. In a blink of an eye. Pompeo is going off. Mike Pence is going off. The Patriots won. And I got to say, if that interference call had been called in regulation, the Pats wouldn't have won. But that's just me. And there's all sorts of things, but we do have a curated show for you today. Indeed. And that was Joy Reid at the top with her panel from AM Joy, basically breaking it down about McConnell being beholden to Trump, and Trump is beholden to Ann Coulter. But I would say Trump is beholden to more than just an Ann Coulter. Really. But she does have some really bizarre sway over the guy. Weird. Well, they broke it down for us, and good thing, too. On the rest of the menu in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, a federal judge smacked down the GOP's latest scheme to stop people from voting in Wisconsin. I mean, the Republicans can't win in a fair fight. They always have to cheat. Republicans gave Russia exactly what it wanted, and Russia literally had a good chuckle about it on its state television. They don't hide it. I mean, come on. And after pressure from an advocacy group and 4 Democratic lawmakers from Texas, the U.S. military translator and his family, who were detained by the Border Patrol, that we reported on last week, by the way, is reluctantly released from custody because ICE, once they get somebody in their clutches, they're meat now. After the break, we then moved to the chef's table where a prominent Russian senator warned that the U.S. warship in the Black Sea should keep its distance. Wow, that sounds like a threat. And Bauhaus design turns 100 as disputes over its legacy, roil. Form follows function, baby. Form follows function. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you will notice to the rightish of the page the chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln, and I presume that she'll be online. You know, there's a polar vortex hitting New York right now, and we'll get more into that and the weather when we get to weather from around the world. But it may be impacting some connectivity, you would think. But the chat room link is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, and thank you, Kelly. To the leftish of the chat room link at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you will notice the contribute button. Yeah, that's all one word. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, your recurring contribution keeps our modem lights blinking in the proper order that allows us to be online, and that means we paid our bills, and we do it because of you. And I want to shout out a big thanks to our recent Patreons. Thank you. Please be patient with me. I've got a lot on my plate right now, personal and professional, and the radio too. So I will get to. I got the notification, but I need to get to the page and look at certificates and all that, and I will get right back to you. And I won't name you unless you want me to, but I need to go look to see if that's the case. All right, but thank you very, very much for our recent Patreons. You can follow Netroots Radio on Twitter at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and we are forever thankful for Tom for doing that. You can follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary. That's kind of like a blog for those of you who are not familiar with Daily Co's, and why are you not, huh? But that gets posted about 10 minutes before showtime, a very integral part to the show, by the way. You can follow West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy on Twitter at Cookbook West. You can then pick up podcasts of the show by way of Stitcher, Spreaker, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Okay. Before we get into the curated part of the show here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Ash Mondays, I have to say something about those Covington Catholic Red Hat Trumpjungen. You have to pop the P when you say Trumpjungen. Very important. It's almost like a guttural, except it's a popping a P. These little red hat, brown shirt mofos, let's be clear, they were not protecting the tribal elder. Give me a break. That is the voluminous statement by the kid and his parents. But let's make one thing clear. This school full of apparently white boys, taught by apparently an all-white faculty in Kentucky, sent busloads of those kids to Washington, D.C. for the anti-abortion rally, the anti-woman's right to choose rally, and also to disrupt the Women's March. And, you know, I guess the Indigenous Day celebration just happened to get in the way. In fact, it was the cherry on top now, wasn't it? So, what causes a school to send busloads of their students across state lines to harass people in the nation's capital? And then claim to all evidence to the and yeah, I keep hearing people saying, "Oh, you got to see the whole video." Yeah. Well, I've seen the whole video, and I've seen whole videos of other videos, and even with that stated, you can't say with certainty. Well, with certainty, you can't say that you've seen all the videos. But what I've seen and what I know belies this defense from this little smirking Jack from Lord of the Flies. He's a choir boy. He's a predator. He is, and his group, a mob of over 70 Lord of the Flies, Trumpjungen, red hat, brown shirt Nazis are baby Hitlers. Hey, Ben, Shapiro, here's your baby Hitler for you. Nah, Ben likes him. Because Ben has the same little smirk that little smirking goon has. I don't care how old he is. He's a kid. Damn right he's a kid. But I don't remember very many people coming to Trayvon Martin's defense of being a kid when he stood up to George Zimmerman, and George Zimmerman killed him with a gun. And then George Zimmerman claimed victimhood too, didn't he? All evidence to the contrary. So let's be clear. And Jake Tapper, you don't know, you know what. It is a tradition for Jake Tapper to basically apologize for white people's racism on Martin Luther King Day. You can look it up. Go back years. You'll see. Okay, we better get into this first offering. What's wrong with my mouth here? It's Monday. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe is by Dan Desai Martin from Share Blue Media. Now, after Scott Walker lost his bid for re-election, Wisconsin Republicans scrambled to send him a bill to sign that would make it harder for Wisconsinites to vote in future elections. They can't win by, our rules of the game, which is one man, one vote, one person, one vote. No. But the law was so obviously anti-democratic that a federal judge struck it down and said doing so was not even a close question, because the law closely resembled the one he had struck down 2 years earlier. He'd always go back for another bite at the apple. Well, you know what? If you hold your tongue with your two fingers and a thumb, hold your tongue and say apple. Yeah, another bite at the apple. This is what they've been doing this whole time, and they have no self-reflection to know what they are doing. The new law tried to limit the early voting period in Wisconsin to just 2 weeks statewide. U.S. District Judge James Peterson said that this restriction, like the one he had already struck down, would suppress the votes of minorities and Democrats living in large cities like Madison and Milwaukee, which hold early voting for 6 weeks. Peterson ridiculed the Republicans' carelessness on this point. Quote, defendants do not even attempt to show that there is a material difference between the number of days permitted under the lame duck law and the number of days permitted under the previous law, he wrote. Republicans passed the voter suppression legislation in a lame duck session after the 2018 midterm elections saw Democrats win every statewide office in Wisconsin. The goal, obviously, in this reporter's opinion, was to steal power from the incoming Democratic governor, Tony Evers, and incoming Attorney General Josh Kaul, with voter suppression as just one part of the plan. Well, this sounds to me like this is a coup in a box. I wonder if Alec put it together. Yes, they did. It's been part of the plan from the beginning. And now, comrade, the work is being done. Carolyn Orr, the national security expert at Share Blue Media, brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The GOP-controlled Senate rejected legislation this week that would have required the U.S. Treasury Department to keep sanctions on companies linked to Oleg Deripaska. Of course, he's that Russian oligarch with, the really close ties to Vladimir Putin. The move is a major win for Putin, whose economy has been hit hard by U.S.-backed sanctions and aimed at punishing Russia for its aggression in the Ukraine. And let's be clear, the Russian economy is about the size of Italy's. And I don't think Italy's really a powerhouse. Let's be clear on that one. And, of course, its involvement in human rights abuses around the world and its malicious cyber activities, including the 2016 influence operation targeting the U.S. presidential election, while Democrats had mounted an effort to block Trump's Treasury Department from lifting sanctions on the Russian companies. Republicans used their majority in the Senate to hand Putin a victory by easing the sanctions. McConnell called the Democratic effort to keep sanctions in place a stunt. Only 11 Republicans were willing to vote against McConnell and Trump's demands to ease up on Russia. Not surprisingly, the vote came as welcome news in Russia, where state-run media seized on the development and celebrated the fact that Republicans had enough votes to stop the Democratic effort to keep sanctions in place. An investigative journalist and Russian media analyst Julie Davis first reported the hosts of the popular Russian TV program, their 60 Minutes, it's called 60 Minutes, but it's the Russia 60 Minutes, used Thursday's episode to highlight the move by Republicans, touting it was the first time since 2014 that the U.S. had lifted sanctions on Russia. The show's hosts laughed out loud about the Democrats not getting enough votes to block the effort. I'm so old, I remember when the Russians laughed at any party in America. Both parties stood up and said, this will not stand. That was before the whole of the GOP had their campaign coffers filled with rubles. Well, actually dollars, but rubles washed through the NRA. Of Think Progress brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. Now, as reported last week, a U.S. military interpreter from Afghanistan was en route with his family to live in the United States because it was getting a little hot in Afghanistan, especially since we're pulling out our troops. But you know, the Trump administration, Stephen Miller, Bannon, et al. Oh, Bannon's not part of the administration anymore. Do you really think that? I mean, is Coulter part of it? Well, it seems like they are. Regardless, they can't stand brown people and black people. But, you know, I mean, anything that's not white. And they'll do anything they can to appease whatever lizard brain racism that they have that they cannot really verbalize except through invective and bold action. Yeah, very much a solution to what they think is the final game. So this interpreter, Mohammed Asif Motawakkil, and his family were granted visas. Now, let's be clear here. Just to be an interpreter, the vetting process is pretty intense. Okay? And this guy worked for over 10 years for the U.S. military with the express promise that he would be protected and brought to the United States at a date to be determined. So then he and his family have to go through another, intense vetting process just to get the visas. And the Trump administration said, "Well, I'm sorry, that's not enough." And this advocacy group, RAISES, it's RAISES, and it's an acronym, of course, as we reported last week, along with 4 Democratic Congress critters from Texas, applied so much pressure and public scorn because of this that the Border Patrol and ICE in general had to backtrack on it, and they have to let the family go and possibly become citizens, which is not in the plan when you're trying to really depopulate this country. As I stated before, property is always more valuable when delivered vacant. Do we really want to be bringing in people from Afghanistan, brown people, when they've already promised a lot of Russian oligarchs and their families to come in here, buy some property overpriced, and have a bunch of kids because it's, I mean, look at the economy in Russia, which is on par with Italy, and then look at us. Really? Okay, that brings us to our break. We better get to the break, because you know where it's going if I keep on going. All right, we'll go to the break, and when we come back, we will be going through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, Bleak Street. Much like his previous movie, Moonlight, director Barry Jenkins manages to create a beautiful, multi-layered movie out of a sad story. Set in 1970s New York, despite being named for the famous Memphis Blues Boulevard, and based on the novel by James Baldwin, If Beale Street Could Talk tells the tale of a young African-American couple, Fonnie and Tish, as they fall in love and create a family, as tragic events are about to befall. Specifically, it involves Fonnie being falsely accused of rape, just as Tish learns she's pregnant with the couple's first child. The Beale Street reference is symbolic, referring to where every black person was born, according to Baldwin. The legend that Louis Armstrong was born there is apparently just that, however. The film stands as a meditation on the struggles of African Americans in a justice system where the odds are stacked, and makes personal the effects that mass incarceration has on that community. It is uncomfortably effective, especially as the film is set 40-plus years ago, and these are still contemporary issues. Since this is based on the work of James Baldwin, it's not a spoiler to say that Beale Street won't have a happy ending. In anyone else's hands, the story could come across as a soap opera, but Jenkins' deft direction, including the shooting of longtime collaborating cinematographer James Laxton and the work of his actors, prevent that. Specifically, Stephan James, a 25-year-old Toronto native, best known for his work in Amazon's Homecoming, shines as Fonnie. Likewise, Regina King, who recently won a Best Supporting Actress Golden Globe, is incredible in her role as Tish's mother, who tries her best to clear Fonnie's name. If Beale Street Could Talk is a forceful gem of a movie, a worthy follow-up to Moonlight, and one that will likely be similarly remembered during awards season. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our page on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. This weekend, many parts of the world, including North America, will be treated to a total lunar eclipse. So here with your viewing guide, how it happens, what to expect, and when to head outside, is Michelle Nichols, Director of Public Observing at the Adler Planetarium in Chicago.
There is a total eclipse of the moon on Sunday evening, January 20th, 2019. A total lunar eclipse occurs when the moon passes through the shadow cast by the Earth into space. When this happens, sunlight shines onto the Earth and passes through the atmosphere that is all the way around the edge of the Earth. The blue light from the sun is scattered away by our air, leaving the red colors of light. So many times, a lunar eclipse turns the moon a dark, dusky red, as we are seeing the collective light from sunrises and sunsets around the entire edge of the Earth at once. The moon can appear coppery orange, red, gray, or it may seem to almost disappear completely during a lunar eclipse. This eclipse will be visible from all of North and South America, and Hawaii will see it in progress when the moon rises. The main part of the eclipse starts at 10:33 p.m. Eastern, 7:33 p.m. Pacific on Sunday evening, January 20th, when the moon starts to pass into the darker part of the Earth's shadow. This is the partial phase of the eclipse. Go outside and face east or southeast and look for the moon in the sky. As the eclipse progresses, you will see more and more of the Earth's curved dark shadow. At 11:41 p.m. Eastern, 8:33 p.m. Pacific, the moon is fully within the Earth's shadow, and we call this totality. The hour or so of totality that we will see is when you will want to pay attention to the color of the eclipse. The moon exits totality at 12:43 a.m. Eastern, 9:43 p.m. Pacific, and the partial eclipse is finished at 1:50 a.m. Eastern, 10:50 p.m. Pacific. Now, my favorite tidbit about lunar eclipses is that we don't know what color the moon will appear during a lunar eclipse until a lunar eclipse happens. The difference in the color has to do with how cloudy, dusty, sooty, or clear the Earth's atmosphere is at the time of the eclipse. So the color of the eclipse can tell us a bit about what is going on with the Earth's air at that moment in time.
So despite the popular names you may have heard about the eclipse this weekend, like Blood Moon, just go out and enjoy it, regardless of what color it is, because the next one won't come round till May 26, 2021. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
It's been pointed out that Donnie Trump has unusually small hands. But who cares? What's truly alarming are his unusually small policy ideas. Draining the swamp, for example. He bragged that he'd be stronger than Drano, promising he'd rid Washington of its infestation with lobbyists, corporate favor seekers, and other swamp critters. But he betrayed that populist pledge from the very start, staffing his entire presidency with CEOs, lobbyists, and Republican megadonors who are gleefully rigging the system for themselves against the rest of us. Also, remember how candidate Trump blistered the behinds of Wall Street's billionaire hedge fund hucksters for getting rich by destroying middle-class jobs? He promised that, by gollies, he would take away their loophole that lets them escape paying taxes they owe. But as president, he wimped out, handing a $1 trillion tax cut to the billionaires, including meekly leaving the pampered hedge funders' loophole entirely untouched. And where's that Make America Great guy who claimed that only he had the vision and chutzpah to rebuild America, pledging to launch a $1 trillion investment in our national infrastructure? His chutzpah petered out and his vision shriveled to a hokey scheme of smoke and mirrors, basically asking states and corporations to come up with the money and calling on them to privatize our public infrastructure. Where's the greatness in that? This is Jim Hightower saying, poor Donnie wants to be thought of as a modern-day Teddy Roosevelt, so he constantly poses as a populist, bigger-than-life bull moose character who's got the right stuff to bust the profiteering trusts in order to stop their rip-offs and their schemes to knock down the middle class. Sadly, though, a pose is all it is, for he's just a run-of-the-mill plutocratic president who speaks loudly but carries nothing bigger than a limp twig when it comes to dealing with the corporate powers.
If you'd like more of Jim Hightower's real populism, check out the Hightower Lowdown. Jim's monthly newsletter gives you the real lowdown on which corporations, by name, are doing what to the middle class, our environment, and our democracy. Each month, the Hightower Lowdown brings you facts you didn't know, along with actions you can take to fight back. It also comes with a sense of humor. Hightower believes we can fight the gods and still have fun. Plus, get this, it's cheap. Only $15 brings you 12 issues a year. For real populism, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
This is a Radio Labour report recorded on Monday, January 21st, 2019. I'm Mark Boulanger. As women around the world were marching for their rights at work and against violence, the labor movement in Canada was continuing its fight against one particular problem: employers forcing employees to wear high heels at work. The campaign was boosted when unions in the province of Alberta convinced the government to implement a ban on the practice. To find out more about the issue, I talked to Siobhan Vipond. Ms. Vipond is the Secretary-Treasurer of the Alberta Federation of Labour. I asked Ms. Vipon first to describe the problems of wearing high heels at work.
The problem behind wearing high heels kind of falls into two categories. One is the physical health of the workers who are forced to wear them. And then the other side of it is the harassment that is associated with that kind of wear. Obviously, the physical health, high heels are not the recommended footwear for many activities, especially related to what happens in the hospitality. And so they're identified as one of the most common workplace hazards in the hospitality industry in Alberta by the Hospitality Safety Association. So we're talking about slips and falling that are a constant risk, but then there's also long-term risks which are associated with this prolonged use of high heels. And I mean, they can be anything from, bunions and ingrown toenails, hammer toes, and then there's back pain, also osteoarthritis in the knees. And the higher the heel, the worse the impact or the increased impact that can have. And then, of course, the harassment side of it and the, reasoning behind a high heel in these situations where it's, quite honestly not practical means that we're asking people to dress in a sexualized and a very gendered way. And with that often comes, not only is that an act of harassment, it also welcomes that and includes that. And it's not related to the job. It's really just this separate thing that is not needed for someone to be very good at their job in the hospitality industry.
How widespread is the problem?
Well, when we look at the numbers, and these, of course, are 2018 numbers, about 148,000 people work in the accommodation and food service industry, and just under 58% of them are women. And so mandatory high heels could theoretically affect all of those. And I think many listeners probably know in their regular, the restaurants that they use and the places that they use, if you start noticing that some places, the uniforms where all of the women are wearing them. So it is rampant, but it also has the potential to affect up to 85,000 workers in Alberta.
Ms. Vipon, you are the Secretary-Treasurer of the Alberta Federation of Labour. Was the AFL involved in getting the government to implement the ban?
Well, the AFL, and along with the labour movement in Canada, we do a lot of work to try and increase occupational health and safety standards in our jurisdictions. And so the Alberta Federation of Labour absolutely has been working on, this has been a long-standing want of ours or need or what we think. So we've been lobbying, we've done papers, it's been in our submissions where we were asking for this ban. And quite honestly, because the idea that someone needs to wear gendered clothes or gendered uniform in these jobs is not justified by the work. So that means then we have to look at what the reasoning behind that is. And then we're looking at getting into the harassment. And so absolutely, the labor movement believes in this, and the AFL did work with government. So absolutely, the labor movement believes that it's not justified for people to be successful in their jobs, and so it is not necessary. And so then it is an undue risk to the women who are forced to wear them.
Why was the ban on high heels implemented now? Was there some incident that prompted the move?
I think there's been attention paid to these issues within the Department of Labor. And so we think that not only is it the advocacy work that is being done, but also they are listening to their people within their departments. When you look at injury rates and, when you have a Hospitality Safety Association saying this is the biggest risk, then it is the job of government to look and say, well, how do we fix this?
And that's it. International labor news you can use. I'm Mark Boulanger. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 minutes. The government of Zimbabwe has shut off access to social media platforms Facebook, Twitter, and WhatsApp amid mass protests over the handling of an ongoing fuel crisis. Access to the entire internet was briefly shut off early on Friday before more limited restrictions went into place. Local reports suggest the government of new President Emerson Mnangagwa is responsible for killing at least 12 protesters this week. Demonstrators first took to the streets last Saturday after Mnangagwa increased oil prices by 200% overnight amid a nationwide cash crunch. Experts say government graft and mismanagement is to blame for the crisis, but Zimbabwe's government accuses opposition figures of fanning the flames, and it arrested hundreds of people on charges of disrupting the public order on Friday. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres wasn't having it and said in a press conference on Friday that Zimbabwe's government has a responsibility to refrain from violence.
We are worried with the deterioration of the situation caused by the potential use of excessive violence in confronting the demonstrations in Zimbabwe. And we appeal to the authorities for restraint in this regard.
And the leaders of the United States and North Korea have reportedly agreed to hold a second round of face-to-face meetings as early as next month. That announcement came after North Korea's top nuclear negotiator emerged from a more than hour-and-a-half-long meeting and lunch with President Trump on Friday in Washington. Advanced teams from both the U.S. and North Korea have reportedly been scouting sites in Vietnam for the next summit, with the U.S. lobbying for the meeting to be held in the capital, Hanoi. Separate, unannounced, preparatory meetings between the U.S. and North Korean envoys were also held in Sweden on Friday, a sign both countries are hard at work on the agenda for the next round of talks. Luke Vargas, The United Nations.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. And we always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 39 degrees. And we are expected to get to a high of about 49 to 50 degrees, a tad warmer than over the weekend. We are currently cloudy, winds light and variable out of the west. And let's see, I'm sorry, I didn't scroll down to get a little bit more of this. I'd looked at it earlier, but things have changed somewhat. And winds will remain light and variable out of the west for the foreseeable future, at least a few more days. We have no percentage of precipitation today, but in the next several days we have about 10 to 20%, and that means we might get a little bit of rain coming through from a few scattered clouds, so it might be that. And we'll have another good storm coming not too long, but for now it looks like we'll have a somewhat of a drying out period, though let's see what humidity is going to be at. Yeah, well, we'll see how dried out we get. Before I get more into the rest of the weather here, I wanted to make mention of the Women's March over the weekend. On Saturday, when I drove into town to do a little bit of banking and some errands before my grandson arrived, the Women's March was in full force. And I got to tell you, it was pounding monsoon-type rains. And there had to have been 400 people marching up the sidewalk through the center of town in Grants Pass. I thought that was quite a turnout. And I know the Women's March has been in somewhat of a scandal with charges of anti-Semitism and whatnot. But it was still a great counter, because the Right to Life March, you know, the fascists were going to tell you how to live your life because you're going to be a handmaid and like it. Contingent had their march with full banners, you know, across the city street. So it was heartening to see that. And, of course, I voiced my pleasure, and cheers arose, even in the pounding rain. Okay, so it looks like pollen is rated as none. Air quality index has gone up a bit. It's in the good range, though, at 41 parts per million. And the daytime UV index is still low, but at 2, where it had been at 1 for a considerable time. Looks like barometric pressure is holding steady at 29.96 inches. visibility is down to 5 miles because our ceiling is where they don't give me a ceiling, but we've got scattered clouds below 7,500 feet. But as I look out, the ridges here that are about 1,500 to 1,600 feet do have fog of sorts around them. And so, yeah, that visibility is down to 5 miles, and relative humidity is at 92%. Thanks. Okay. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Okay. London is 42 and cloudy. Paris is 38 degrees and sunny. Rome is 48 and partly cloudy. Let's see what they have as a weather advisory, because there is an exclamation point over Rome, Italy right now. All right, come on up, Rome. Potential disruption due to thunderstorms, and I've been in Rome during a thunderstorm, and it can be pretty damn scary. Paris, too. Boy, no wonder people hightail it out of there during thunderstorm season, but you don't expect thunderstorms and rain to be hitting, Paris or Rome this time of year normally. All right, let's get on with this. Kiev is 26 degrees and mostly cloudy. Kabul is 20 degrees and clear. Hong Kong, 57 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 40 degrees Fahrenheit and clear with its own weather advisory of a dry air advisory. You got thunderstorms and heavy rains in Rome, and you got dry air in Tokyo. Well, Trump said over the weekend that he wishes that we could get some of that global warming because they were having such cold weather on the East Coast. And he doesn't know the difference between weather and climate. That's the whole point. Idiot. Okay. Sydney, Australia is 75 and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 48 degrees Fahrenheit, fair, with a coastal flood advisory. Lots of water coming off of the mountains, going into the ocean, and every tributary is going to be, well, as they say, flooded. And New York is 7 degrees Fahrenheit. Partly cloudy, in the grips of the polar vortex, and with the polar vortex and icy winds, you get also a gale warning right out of the day after tomorrow. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their icy property, and these people positively live around the world. Polina Ivanova of Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. River City Hash Mondays, Dateline Moscow, visits to the Black Sea by U.S. warships have nothing to do with U.S. security and are motivated by domestic politics, prominent Russian Senator Alexei Pushkov said yesterday, warning that they should stay away from the Russian coast. Well, you would think they would. The U.S. guided missile destroyer Donald Cook began moving towards the Black Sea on Saturday to conduct, quote, maritime security operations and enhance regional maritime stability, combined readiness, and naval capability, a U.S. Navy statement said. And I read that as, speak softly and carry a big stick. The Russian Black Sea Fleet began monitoring the warship once it entered the region, and U.S. warships are becoming frequent visitors to the Black Sea. These visits have nothing to do with the U.S. security. Pushkov, a member of Russia's Upper House Commission on Information Policy, wrote in a statement, they flaunt their flag. They send us a signal and appease their own senators who are demanding they send a whole fleet of military personnel and equipment to the Black Sea. They should keep away from our coastline. Well, this guy's certainly not a Chekhov, is he? This week, a court in Russia extended by 3 months the arrest of 24 Ukrainian sailors captured along with their ships in November in the Kerch Strait, which links the Black Sea with the Azov Sea. And a lot of Trump supporters are saying, where is that? They stand accused of illegally crossing into Russian territory. Really now? I wonder what the EU and NATO has to say about that. Oh, the EU is being broken up? And Trump wants to take the United States out of NATO? The United States and the European Union have called on Russia to release the men, but the Kremlin has said they must be put on trial, and no trial date has been set, because that's how it happens. They put you into a Siberian gulag, like, 1 day in the life of Ivan Denisovich, and multiply that by, 20 years.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Anonymous worker bees at the Agence France Presse bring us this last amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bauhaus, the design school that left its mark on everything from teapots to tower blocks, iPhones to IKEA, and whatever else is square and sterile, marks its centenary this year, touching off a politically charged debate about its lasting impact. The influence of Bauhaus, created during the turbulent period between the world wars and finally chased out of Germany by the Nazis, can hardly be overstated. Its radical form follows function and less is more tenets have become so commonplace that the aesthetics of the modern world are unthinkable without them. Weimar, with its winding cobblestone alleys and primly restored historical buildings, might seem an unlikely ground zero for the bombshell launched by Walter Gropius with the school's founding in April 1st of 2019. Bauhaus is among our country's most globally influential cultural exports. President Frank-Walter Steinmeier said he kicked off the celebrations this week. He noted then that when the movement was run out of Germany after Hitler rose to power in 1933, it touched off a diaspora that would end up spreading Bauhaus's gospel far and wide. The design school, which also counts among its disciples Russian abstract painter Kandinsky and Swiss-born surrealist Paul Klee, had at its core the idea of making beautiful design accessible to all social classes. And when I say sterile, it doesn't have to be that way. You might say that Eichler was influenced tremendously by Bauhaus. I lived in an Eichler-like abode at the top of Arch Heights, up Bluebird Canyon Road at the top of Arch Heights on Laguna Beach for a bit of time. And although it wasn't a true Eichler, could I have afforded one then? Probably not. But it was beautiful and had a bit of modern furniture, more in the Scandinavian design then. And when I say sterile, it can be that way. I prefer myself, I lean more towards California Craftsman, and it's just what I like. So something a little heavier than the sleek, exact lines of Bauhaus. But Bauhaus, remember, and I better finish up here quick, Bauhaus was a radical school, and the Nazis hated anything that could be considered radical. And that's why they got kicked out and hounded and may be hounded to this day, so we need to keep that in mind. All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but Netroots Radio broadcasts on. We'll meet up tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.